Let's get to 5 headlines. All right, number one, a Trump supporter was shot and killed at a protest in Denver over the weekend. He apparently sprayed mace at the shooter, who responded by killing him. You can see a photo of the fateful encounter here. Mace is not a lethal weapon, so this would seem to be a disproportionate response. Now, the man with the gun is named Matthew Doloff. He was arrested for murder at the scene. The interesting thing is that apparently he was hired as private security by a local news station. That's NBC affiliate 9 News. And here's the other interesting thing. According to city officials, Doloff was not licensed as a security guard in the city. So it would seem that a news channel hired, whether knowingly or not, an unlicensed armed security guard who then proceeded to shoot and kill a pro-Trump demonstrator. This ought to warrant charges, I would think, not just for Doloff, but for 9 News as well. All right, number 2, Keith Olbermann still exists, apparently. It seems we haven't heard much from him in recent years. That's, at least I hadn't heard anything from him. I assume that he had returned to his lair deep in the earth somewhere, but he has reemerged now. He has been maybe summoned after somebody read a curse from an old book in an attic somewhere. And now he's back on the scene, and he's about as reasonable and coherent as you remember. Listen.
Trump can be and must be expunged. The hate he has triggered, the Pandora's box he has opened, they will not be so easily destroyed. So, let us brace ourselves. The task is twofold. The terrorist Trump must be defeated, must be destroyed, must be devoured at the ballot box. And then he and his enablers and his supporters and his collaborators and the Mike Lees and the William Barrs and the Sean Hannitys and the Mike Pences and the Rudy Giulianis and the Kyle Rittenhouses and the Amy Coney Barretts must be prosecuted and convicted and removed from our society while we try to rebuild it, and to rebuild the world Trump has nearly destroyed by turning it over to a virus. Remember it, even as we dream of a return to reality and safety and the country for which our forefathers died, that the fight is not just to win an election, but to win it by enough to chase, at least for a moment, Trump and the maggots off the stage, and then try to clean up what they left. Remember it, even though to remember it means remembering that the fight does not end November 3rd, but in many ways will only begin that day.
Yes, he says that Amy Coney Barrett, along with Bill Barr and, of course, Trump and a number of others, should be prosecuted, convicted, and removed from society. First of all, when we're in the midst of, the media's blaming Donald Trump for supposedly encouraging violence or encouraging white supremacists, which he's not doing. But how about this? You've got a prominent, I guess he's still prominent. You've got a prominent voice on the left, at least a well-known voice, saying that Amy Coney Barrett, Supreme Court nominee, should be removed from society. Look, I understand that in the feverish, fantasy-fueled minds of leftists, Trump is responsible for all manner of crimes against humanity, and so that's why they're always calling for him to be arrested. But what crime did Amy Coney Barrett commit? Even in their feverish, fantasy-filled minds. What crime are you accusing her of committing exactly? At least with Trump, I know what crimes they're accusing him of committing. Like they're accusing him of being a Russian spy, okay? So I understand that. It's ridiculous, but I understand it. What are you even saying that Amy Coney Barrett did? Did she go 12 miles over the speed limit on the way to dropping your kid off for soccer practice? Is that the crime? We're at the point now where these people, they don't even bother making up a fake crime. They just work themselves into a sweat and scream that everyone that they don't like should be in prison. They don't even bother to explain why. That's their argument style. So you say to them, so here's my view on this subject. Oh yeah? Well, you should be in prison. Prison! Go to prison! What? Dude, I was just telling you that I think Batman Begins was better than The Dark Knight. That's all I'm trying to say. The thing is, I also think, because I know you hear me talking about this and you're probably thinking, well, you're a hypocrite, Matt, because don't you often say that your political opponents and many other people should be locked in prison? Well, yes, I do, but I'm a theocratic fascist. So that's my whole thing, right? That's part of it. If you're pretending to be opposed to fascism, then this approach doesn't work. But anyway, glad to see that Olbermann is back. Always elevating the national dialogue, doesn't he? All right, number 3, Julie Borowski is a political commentator, more on the libertarian side of things. She says she was kicked off a flight because her toddler wouldn't wear a mask. Here's the tweet. She says, we got kicked off a flight. Our 2.5-year-old wouldn't put on a mask. We had practiced beforehand, but he wasn't having it. And then she tags Southwest. So apparently she was on Southwest. She says Southwest staff was apologetic. I get they don't make the rules. I hope airlines ease up the rules because this really limits families with toddlers. Yeah. Well, Julie here is being much nicer and more polite about it than I would be if that were me. You get kicked off your flight. 2.5-year-old won't wear a mask? Of course he won't. Of course a 2.5-year-old won't wear a mask. Here, in fact, is what I'll say. And there may be some exceptions for this, but broadly speaking, if you have managed to scare your 2.5-year-old to such an extent that he will actually keep his mask on for hours at a time, then I think it's very likely you're a horrible parent and person. I can't even conceive. I've got a 3-year-old, almost 4. And he won't keep a mask on, and I'm not going to force him to. Most of the time when we're going in somewhere, I don't even give him a mask. We just go in, and that's it. Or I'll hand it to him, and then he'll immediately put it in his pocket. Fine. I tried to comply with the rules. I did my part. 2.5-year-old though that's just crazy to even expect it. And so I'm just trying to imagine to get a 2.5-year-old to do that. I mean, it's possible you have a 2.5-year-old with an extremely sort of obedient personality and extremely cooperative. Maybe there are a few of those 2.5-year-olds out there, but the vast majority of them are not going to do that. In order to get them to do it, you would the psychological manipulation you would have to employ to convince them to do it and keep it on their face is unthinkable to me. This whole thing is crazy. This is absolutely insane. And never mind the fact that it has been repeatedly shown that there's probably a very low risk of someone who's 2.5 contracting or spreading the virus. And on top of that, remember that what we're always told, right, is you wear the mask for me, right? You wear the mask for me. You don't wear it for yourself. You wear it for other people. And so when we are forcing crying, confused, scared toddlers to wear masks, we can't even pretend we're doing it for their sake. Can we? We're doing it for us. We're doing it to protect us from them. That's what we're doing. It's cowardly, it's disgusting, it's disgraceful. Shame on Southwest for that. And yes, they have the right to make whatever rules they want for their business, but that doesn't mean that if the rules are insane, that doesn't mean we can't criticize it. And we can here, and we should. Number 4, speaking of insane, Gal Gadot is going to star in a movie about Cleopatra, and that's not the insane part. That part, it's fine. Because we live in the dumbest possible world, this has provoked backlash from people who are mad that Cleopatra's ethnicity or her ethnic identity is being appropriated. One person leading the charge is Abdul El Sayed, CNN commentator and public health doctor, self-described. He says, so there were no Egyptian women to play an Egyptian queen? Yes, very offensive. Very offensive. I'm also scandalized that they couldn't find anyone who actually was alive in the year 50 BC. I mean, you're telling me that out of all the 2,000-year-old people on Earth, you couldn't find one to play this role, someone who could speak authentically to the lived experience of people who lived 50 years before Christ? Of course, looked at another way, this is all very stupid. Very, 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 very stupid. For many reasons, not the least of which being that Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian, actually. She was Greek. Second, are there, so every time we hear this, we couldn't find an actor or actress of this ethnicity to play this role. Well, how do you know there are? I mean, are there Egyptian actresses who could play this role effectively, who would actually be best for it? Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. I don't know. You're just assuming it. At the very least, if you're going to do this, put forward a person who you think would be better for the role, an actual person, not an ethnicity or a skin color, an actual person. And then explain why you think they're better for it, going beyond their ethnicity or skin color. But all of that is irrelevant because the third point, of course, is that the job of an actor is to pretend to be what they are not. That is literally the entire job. That is what they are paid to do. And it used to be that the further an actor or actress was from, the identity of the role, the more impressed we were with the performance. In other words, the more unlike the actor is from the role, that just makes it even more impressive. Think about, Daniel Day-Lewis in My Left Foot, playing a paraplegic. He's not paraplegic himself. And these days, you could never get away with that. Because it'd be said, well, what about a paraplegic actor? I don't know. How many of paraplegic actors are there? Or are you just saying we can never tell this story until we have actors of that identity? But, back then, when it was sane 30 years ago, whenever that movie came out, everybody was impressed with the performance because here's an able-bodied person able to portray this role, even though he is not that himself, but he was able to effectively portray it. And very impressive. It was a great job acting precisely because he is so himself unlike that role. All right, number 5. Finally, Tucker Carlson last week did a segment on his show where he discussed UFO sightings and specifically this new documentary that was just released called The Phenomenon. Here's a clip of the Carlson segment, which includes some clips of the documentary. Listen.
We used to be defensive on this topic, but there's no reason to be. There is now an enormous amount of evidence, including physical evidence, that UFOs, whatever they are real. Why don't we know a lot more about this? Because the government has hidden that information from us, outrageously. But now some of that information has come into public view thanks to a new documentary called The Phenomenon. We learned the feds are hiding more than we thought they were.
All we're saying, nobody has to agree that why it's there. But shouldn't we at least be spending some money to study all these phenomenon? Shouldn't we study this stuff? The answer is yes. And that's all this was about. And why the federal government all these years has covered up, put brake pads on everything, stopped it. I think it's very, very bad for our country.
Are you saying that there's some evidence that still hasn't seen the light of day?
I'm saying most of it hasn't seen the light of day.
It's outrageous. And it's not a partisan question, by the way. That, of course, was former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada, a Democrat if there ever was one. But that's not even the biggest claim he makes. According to the film, Reid said that UFOs have actually and repeatedly interfered with our nuclear weapons capabilities. So where are these UFOs from? Some researchers told the filmmakers that their origins are becoming clearer.
Dr. Jacques Vallée has collected purported metal debris from UFO cases dating as far back as 1947 that experts are analyzing in a state-of-the-art laboratory. He was astonished to find their composition was unlike any known metal.
This material was manufactured. It's not natural. It's not natural to the materials that we have around us in the lab or on the Earth.
Yeah, physical evidence of extraterrestrial spaceships visiting Earth, not a big deal. It's nothing compared to like the fly on Mike Pence's forehead.
And he's right. The most amazing thing about all this is that so few people seem to care. We've got photographic evidence, video evidence, physical evidence of these things, and everyone just sort of shrugs their shoulders and moves on. Now, I watched the documentary myself after seeing the Carlson segment, and as one of the weirdos who, myself, I'm one of the weird people where I've watched a bunch of UFO documentaries in my day. I can say that this one is by far and away the most credible and impressive of any that I've ever seen. Even the narrator who you heard there, he's I don't know what his name is, but I recognize that voice. I watch a lot of documentaries in general, and this is a guy who does like Ken Burns films and PBS documentaries, a mainstream documentary narrator. And the film includes, as you saw, former prominent, very prominent government officials, politicians, former military officials, scientists. These are credible people for the most part. I mean, Harry Reid, I don't know if I'd call him credible. In fact, I wouldn't. But even there, when it comes to ideological things, I don't think he's credible. But that he's putting his name next to this. Also, they've got supposed eyewitnesses, lots of photographic and video evidence, like I mentioned, all in the documentary. The thing is, one objection you often hear to the UFO claims is that, well, if UFOs were real and aliens were actually visiting, we should have very good evidence of it by now. Why is it that, like with Bigfoot, somehow nobody's ever come forward with really remarkable physical evidence or video evidence of this? Why is it that even in modern times, everybody who records one of these phenomena, manages to get video of it, seems to be recording it with their grandmother's toaster oven? I mean, why isn't it that everyone's carrying around these really advanced videos, cameras in their pockets? Why hasn't it ever been captured? Well, the thing is, that's true of Bigfoot. Yeah, that's a very good argument against Bigfoot. There are a lot of good arguments against it, but one of them is just there's never been anything close to actual compelling evidence of that. As far as UFOs, though, actually there has been a lot of really good evidence. Photos, videos, physical evidence. It just seems that nobody believes it. Even the good evidence, nobody believes. And so you start to think, what kind of evidence would the average person actually need to see in order to entertain the idea that maybe this really is extraterrestrial in origin? Probably short of being personally visited by alien beings, the average person won't be convinced. By the way, and not to say that I'm convinced, as in I'm 100% on board that I'm sure that these are aliens. I'm just saying that a lot of this stuff is interesting. And the photographic evidence goes back decades. There have been very interesting photos of flying saucers from the 50s that have been investigated by various government commissions and so forth, and have been labeled unexplained, as in they aren't obviously manipulated or staged. None of the obvious explanations hold. So we're left with, what is it? So there is something going on here. I think we could say at a minimum with certainty that we have proof of the existence of aircraft that far exceeds the known technological ability of modern man. And when we say far exceeds, we mean stuff that is like hundreds of years or more beyond our known capabilities. It's easy to speculate, of course, that some government somewhere has this technology and is testing it out. But the problem is that, first of all, these sightings go back to the 40s and 50s. If a world government somewhere had access to this technology 70 years ago, you'd think they would have used it by now in a very noticeable, significant way. Is it believable that some other world power is that far ahead of us and yet hasn't used that power in any noticeable way? I don't know. Of course, when you compare that explanation, which seems implausible, with the idea that some intelligent civilization is visited, which both are implausible, which is more implausible? And you could make a good argument that the alien civilization is more implausible, but still, there's definitely something going on here. And when we get to the point where you have government officials on the record saying, I don't know, this is weird, that should make us take notice, I think. All right. Of course, you always have to guard against wishful thinking with these sorts of things, because I would love for it to actually be aliens, just because that would be cool. And even if they're coming here to invade the Earth and kill us all right, okay, yeah, we had a good run. I'm okay with that too. So, there's a silver lining to that as well. So you have to guard against the wishful thinking when it comes to these kinds of things. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.